Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, a podcast that aims to provide valuable information to young saxophonists and music students in a digestible amount of time. I'm Owen Robinson, and today I will be interviewing Mr. Jason Marshall. Mr. Marshall has performed with artists including Roy Hargrove, Aretha Franklin, Dee Dee Bridgewater, The Roots, the Mingus Big Band, and many more. It's great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the first question that I wanted to ask is, how does the life of a professional jazz musician look different after the COVID-19 pandemic?
First of all, the clubs are not open as late, which is a meaningful detail for me because a lot of my career was based on being able to stack 2, 3, sometimes 4 gigs in a day. But a lot of the 1 a.m., 2 a.m. sets just don't exist anymore. And some of the clubs aren't there anymore either. So that created sort of a void that hasn't really been filled, in the way that it was. I find after COVID, there's a lot of social anxiety that just wasn't there. Particularly with a lot of the older musicians, I find they're just more afraid to be in public than they were, which is unfortunate. And to me, even more unfortunate is that many of the opportunities to engage with the elders is much more curated and sort of structured in ways that keep out, or rather keep more musicians away than they bring in. The clubs are much less social environments broadly, where you could go near a jazz club and have a reasonable expectation that you'd encounter some musicians. But now, if you haven't bought a table in the venue, you're not going to hear them play. You won't talk to them. You won't. It's a much more kind of sequestered experience than it used to be, or siloed, After COVID, the sort of the advent of the self-made musician was just terribly inflated. I mean, social media allowed that to happen anyway, but after COVID, folks are just sort of materializing out of thin air as kind of finished products, of their own making, and it's interesting to watch. It's interesting to watch people who developed almost exclusively during COVID, and it's a timing thing. It's not their fault that that's when they were born and that's what happened at that time in their life, but it is unfortunate that they've had to develop sort of in that vacuum without the experience of just kind of mundane human interaction that ultimately makes us who we are.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and definitely a subtopic, the idea of the self-made artist, or really a self-made anything. Correct. How that's kind of a fallacy in a lot of ways. Maybe it's just maybe it's social media, maybe it's the way people live and think right now.
Sure.
But we're definitely overly prioritizing or idealizing the individual and not necessarily acknowledging their influences, whether that be recorded influences or influences, in day-to-day life.
Yeah, I would also add that there's a degree of professional matriculation that just isn't happening. So you have folks that populate the music industry publications haven't played with anyone, haven't done much outside of their own auspices. Don't necessarily live where things are happening, and yet they have a full studio of students, and this collection of documentation related to nothing other than their own kind of aspirations and ideals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that describes a lot of the academic world, especially, and how might, I guess this is kind of a follow-up question, how might those teachers, say, in maybe more secluded areas or at smaller colleges, how might they encourage students to either set up their own scene locally or move somewhere with a larger scene?
Well, you got to lead by example. You got to do it. You got to create it where you're at, and that's part of this so-called jazz thing that gets left out a lot, is that there's a lot of community building that's implied in the music, and there's a lot of activism implied in the music. And so when you take out the community building and the activism, what you're left with is something that doesn't really acknowledge the people you allegedly there to make music for. A way a teacher can do it is by creating it for the students. I think a great example of that is Diego Rivera, who's a saxophone player who taught at Michigan State and is now I guess University of Austin. Another great example would be Sean Jones, right? Who has created scenes everywhere he's gone. Diego Rivera, Sean Jones. There's others. Leon Anderson is a great example of that. Really just created a scene wherever they went. And I think that's the example you have to set. And they've done this while maintaining a world-class level musicianship. Because the thing about this music is that it only really propagates in the ways that it needs to when it's delivered at a world-class level. There's a lot of sort of negative publicity around the music and the culture because we allowed it to propagate, at mediocre levels, and anything mediocre is subject to ridicule, and often deservedly ridiculed. But we're in the era of participation trophies, so mediocrity doesn't have the same checks and balances that it used to. We were all mediocre at one point, and through virtue of personal excellence, we overcame that. But now, if there are no barriers to entry, then mediocre gets to sit at the same table with functionally excellent, and then we have the problem we have now.
Yeah, I think that can be applied to so many aspects of our life in America and the world. I think, it's not just music, for sure. And we won't maybe get into the specifics of where else that mediocrity is kind of seeping in. But
sure.
I'm glad you bring up Leon Anderson. I've worked very closely with him during my time at Florida State, and I am actually an alumnus of Michigan State.
Okay.
I was actually a classical saxophone major at Michigan State, and but I participated as much as I could in the jazz program. I played in one of the big bands, and it was actually Diego Rivera who set me up with the jazz studies minor there. He was kind of in charge of that program.
Got it.
So yeah, I definitely am I definitely benefited a lot from the scene that he set up in Lansing and East Lansing. I went to the jam sessions downtown at Moriarty's, and there were a few more that would happen around town. I'd go out and hear him and Randy Napoleon and Rodney Whitaker play, and that had a profound influence on me. And I was very devoted to chamber music and classical music, but so I wasn't I definitely was at a mediocre level throughout probably most of my undergrad in terms of playing jazz, but just even going out to hear those musicians, and occasionally try and sit in and learn the hard way too, what I knew and what I didn't know, and that was extremely formative for me. And now down here at Florida State, having an opportunity to work, every single week with Professor Detweiler, play in big band with Professor Anderson, play in Scotty Barnhart's combo, Bill Peterson's combo, and go to the jam sessions around town that the faculty have set up here. And also very importantly, being able to put down classical saxophone for enough time to actually build my skill set in jazz. And another thing for my classical saxophone friends that I've tried to tell a lot of people is that you're not going to lose as much of that as you think you are. I think academic musicians kind of get afraid of going out into the world and playing, and I get it, but also it's one of those things where I would not be where I am in my education if it weren't for those local scenes.
Sure. Sure. I mean, we can agree that we have both been made better for just having had those community experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you have written a number of essays on
I have.
notable jazz artists, including John Coltrane and Lee Morgan, etc. I think Stanley Turrentine is on there.
Yep.
And I'm wondering how the process of researching and writing has affected your playing.
In the development of becoming whatever kind of musician I am, I've been prone to fits of obsession, and just spending, sometimes a year listening to one person, sometimes one record, one song for 3 months. And it's that obsessive kind of personality trait that I try and unpack anytime I'm researching a musician. And so in a way, in researching, I'm in certain ways just looking for things that justify my behavior. I'm looking for ways to assuage any guilt I might have for being so obsessive at times. But it's that obsession that gives birth to a lot of the culture, be it music or otherwise, that we find meaningful to us, right? And so when I'm looking at someone like John Coltrane, my research about John Coltrane has left me with the perspective that he's much more of a religious figure than he was a musician. Much more. I think that the saxophone for him was certainly a means to that end, but particularly as an educator, John Coltrane's contribution is as much philosophical as it is technical to do with the saxophone. You know, I would argue more philosophical than musical. Uh, I mean, clearly he's the world-class saxophonist and musician and writer that we knew him to be. But man, what a contribution he made in the space of modern religious thought and just higher level thinking from sources that were not typically associated with such things. His experience with Indian religious precepts, I would argue African spiritual systems, you know, particularly as they relate to communities from the Carolinas. You know, there's just so much to be had when we study John Coltrane, and we don't need him to be a musician. You know, so as a as a as an educator, when I reference John Coltrane, it's mostly from a philosophical standpoint. That said, all my saxophone students eventually learn the solo from Two Bass Hit, the D flat blues. We definitely do that, but we talk much more about John Coltrane as a philosopher and as I mean, frankly, a saint. You know, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I feel the same way about Coltrane. He's definitely, if I had to choose a favorite saxophonist, especially me being a tenor player for the
Yep.
most part, he's definitely at the top of my list. You know, I've transcribed a fair amount of him, of his solos. I'm working on his solo over Olio from Workin',
Yep.
Miles Davis
Yep.
Quintet.
Yep.
And I last year I did I Could Write a Book
Sure.
off of the same
Yeah,
record.
I've done that one. Yeah, I've done that one too.
Yeah,
Matter of fact, that recording is why I recorded I Could Write a Book.
that's awesome. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that's such a great recording. I just love I love the evolution of John Coltrane on recording in the span of, I mean, really only a decade.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, and his recording career really wasn't that long, but
Correct.
there's so much,
There's so much. Yep.
so much inside of that
Yep.
that decade.
Yep.
And you know, he's somebody I know I'm going to learn from for the rest of my life.
Yep.
And yeah, I just, you know, I love the uniqueness of his sound, the obvious influence it had on the saxophone tradition.
Sure.
You know, it's funny. You know, you listen to like saxophonists 70s, 80s, 90s. They all want to sound like him. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I find particularly that era of saxophone players kind of being like 20 years old in 1970, right? You hear everyone reconciling their regard for John Coltrane with the newly electrified musical landscape and trying to make sense of that and trying to figure out where that can fit. It's wild to me because I don't, and this is my own in my own head. I don't imagine that John Coltrane thought that it would go this way. Like how do we get, say, you know, okay, we know John Coltrane and John Gilmore, and like, to me, Sun Ra is a much more obvious continuation of John Coltrane, but that we have Steve Grossman and Michael Brecker and Rick Margitza and all, you know, all of those folks that surely center John Coltrane, but to me, not in ways that are particularly obvious unless you play the saxophone. It's just it's amazing because I can't imagine in this moment that he thought it would go this way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, he died in 1967, and you know, it's the musical landscape changed so rapidly in the years after he died.
Yep.
And I'm glad too. I'm glad you mentioned Rick Margitza. He's a Detroit native, and definitely I would say on par with a lot of the saxophonists of that era. I mean, Bob Berg,
Absolutely.
Michael Brecker.
Yeah.
And I don't hear as many people talking about him, and he's one that I think that that the listeners should go check out if they haven't already.
Sure. Well, he lives in Paris, doesn't he?
That sounds familiar. I'd have to double check.
Yeah,
that.
I think he lives in Europe, which for some people can put you off the radar in ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, he's he's got a number of records out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
I definitely, I mean, I need to go check out more of him. I've listened to at least one of his records.
One of the things to your question about researching these different people is understanding what kind of cultural influences they were, but also the cultural influences that created who they were. Like what was happening at that time to even make a person like this. One of the pieces I did early on in my writing or in my experiences as a writer of long form pieces was paralleling the life of Charlie Parker and Malcolm X. And they were born relatively close to one another and lived, I want to say, lived and died within a month of each other. And were subject to a quite similar set of circumstances in terms of what it took to even become who they were, never mind the experience of such a foreshortened lifespan. And a lot of the research I've done has left me spending most of my time, as a musician learning music, but also really just humanizing these people that we have sort of lionized or deified. But for me, a lot of that magic is lost if we don't humanize them. If we don't recognize that whatever we know them to be, they started off as very much human.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. I think, decades and decades go by and these people become sort of, like you said, deified, almost, godlike figures.
Yep.
In the context of the music, and we forget that, they were humans who had to figure all this stuff out.
Correct.
The same way that we aspire to.
Yep.
There's a famous interview with Bill Evans and his brother Harry, where Harry's he's asking him all these specific questions, harmonic questions, and Bill just says, well, I mean, if I told you that every single answer, wouldn't that kind of, destroy the joy of figuring it out for yourself? And
well, there is that. I will admit to a position that, particularly as an educator, I do a lot of work to avoid any needless mystery. I think this life has enough built-in sort of vague spaces. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to insist that people figure it out. I think that's implied. That's going to happen anyway. But for me, the position or the answer that I'm not going to tell you because I want you to figure it out is not terribly helpful as an educator. Also, when you do that, when you tell people to figure it out, you're basically asking them to make it up. And then, it's a short hop from that to plainly revisionist history. And so at that point, we can't get mad at people telling lies about the history if we haven't told the truth about it.
That's a great point. Maybe my Bill Evans example wasn't maybe the greatest example.
No, I'm not judging it. I'm just saying to that point, that speaks to why I do the work in the ways that I do it, to make it as plain and as obvious as I can.
And I very much appreciate that, as, somebody with an academic background who really wants to stay in academia. I've observed a lot of that kind of teaching.
Yep.
And I think that, not to make up numbers, but probably 90% of the students I've talked to do not like when teachers, give those kind of cop-out answers.
Yeah.
Oh,
also,
yeah, you'll hear it, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, no. Also, that reeks of intellectual cowardice. Because either you don't know or you haven't done the work to stay current on what the answers are. Maybe you had an answer, but you haven't maintained your faculties individually to retain a grasp of that answer.
Right. Yeah, and I think, a lot of that comes down to just good pedagogy, having an idea of not only what it takes to be successful, but also, in many ways, more importantly, how you're going to explain it to somebody, and are they going to understand it?
Well, for me, that is something that I've learned in educating middle and high schoolers. You gotta be open to what their modalities might be, which is to say, you teach the students you have, not the program you know. And in college, as long as you can demonstrate via your curriculum the program you know, you get compensated for demonstrating the program you know rather than teaching the students you have. Because the students you have will demonstrate whether you know what you're doing or not. Whatever their level, you can pretty easily assess development, even if they don't become great musicians in a semester. If they are learning how to teach themselves, that's really the only metric we have. We can't know when it's going to click for a student, but we can show them through process of elimination what their learning modalities are and are not. And I know as a student where I hit walls educationally was when the one modality that was supposed to work for the whole class obviously didn't work for me.
Yeah, that's always a tough moment for students, I think I think sometimes we get really into the weeds with learning styles, oh, am I more visual, am I more this or that? But I think there's even more nuance to it than that. Than we want to. My dad is a community college president and an educator. He was an English professor for a long time, and he would often talk about learning styles, and we make a big deal about visual or auditory or tactile, and he's like, well, really, a lot of it comes down to engagement.
Correct.
Are you engaged? Are you paying attention? And it's more nuanced than that too. I think this is a good segue into my next question, which is, what are some things young students routinely struggle with when it comes to learning jazz?
How to present the music, because even a very high proficiency level tends to deliver a mediocre presentation if the presentation skills are not compelling. You have to be able to deliver a compelling presentation no matter what the medium is. You got to make them care about the thing, right? And my students and I, we talk often about how do we make people care about something they cannot understand. This is the work of presenting music. Some musical spaces dumb the music down so that the uninitiated can understand it. But we're not in that space as such. And so we have to figure out how to make something that might be a little hard to understand at first, something that they can care about. And that speaks to, the work I've done as a researcher and writer, just learning how to humanize people, and how to make the story of musicians and music relatable to non-musicians. And so I think, Cannonball Adderley is a great example of that. Ramsey Lewis is a great example of that. I think in ways, Art Blakey was an example of that. There are others, but I think if so-called jazz lacks anything, it is jazz lacks a focus on presentation. We don't necessarily present the music well outside of one example of respectability. And I think that one example of respectability has lost as many listeners as it has won. Because I spent a lot of time around Roy Hargrove. I spent 14 years playing with him. But he, where the jazz industry was concerned, was often sort of viewed as the rebel, the cast off, the sort of, the compromise between what the people wanted and what the industry wanted to present. And what it showed me is that for me, job number one of music is raising consciousness, but job number one of folks in the so-called jazz space is winning listeners. And so if you can't make people want to hear what you're doing, it doesn't matter. Without listeners, nothing we're doing matters, because we're doing music, we're playing music. And music requires listeners to validate, and that's why sometimes, when we get into the space of grant writing and, when I first asked a music teacher about grant writing, they told me, folks write grants to produce music that no one will pay to hear. And that struck me. While I don't agree that that's universally true, I have found that to be the case at times, for sure. And so young musicians, they need more examples of how to present the music in a compelling way, so that folks in their hometown, wherever they're from, can take the risk of spending time and money on this thing and feel like they made a good decision in the first 10 minutes. I have a whole presentation that I give on how to create a set of music, a hypothetical 1-hour set of music. And there's an energetic contour that works every time. And you can change out the songs, but the energetic contour of the set, I found there's a particular contour that is very, very effective for sure, audiences of musicians, but particularly with audiences of non-musicians. One of the things that young musicians don't consider, because we spend so much time in music school interacting with other music students, is that your audience is not going to be music students. And now that is one of the more sobering things music students hear, is that you're not going to be playing for your friends. You got to play for people that will never learn an instrument, never understand what you're doing, but you got to make them care about it anyway.
That's a great point, and I just wish in academia we talked a little bit more about that.
Yeah, but we got to know it first. A lot of us don't know it.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. You know, and also this idea of presentation. I like that word. You know, I think it encapsulates a lot of different things, you know, including style. You know, it's like good ideas with bad time, you know, that's, well, I mean, it is what it is, right?
Exactly.
You know, it's like if you're not swinging, if you don't have a good triplet feel, if you haven't internalized at least some of the rhythmic and linguistic style of jazz music, you know, it's really just, well, as they say, it's going to sound sad, you know? It's not really going to sound like jazz, you know? And I think it relates to, I mean, that's kind of everything. I mean, speech. If Martin Luther King Jr. had said, I have a dream, it's pretty cool, you guys should read about it in the newspaper, and I think it's a really good idea, thanks, you know?
Yeah.
But that worked, you know?
But here's the thing, your example is often how people present music.
Yes.
Hello, my name's John Doe. I wrote some songs. Please like, share, and subscribe. Yeah, that's not.
Right, yeah. It's like, wow, that's what an inspiring message, right?
Yeah,
if Lincoln had said, you know, 7 years ago, this country is pretty awesome, and I think you should think that too.
Right.
You know, that's like,
yeah.
Who would care about it? You know.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because the thing is, you got to make people care.
Yeah. So, speaking of like and subscribe, etc.,
right.
That's another segue here.
Yep.
Do you feel that social media has positively or negatively, could be both for different reasons, affected young people's ability to learn jazz music?
Social media has given us some really effective tools to learn music. It has also allowed folks without social skills to create employment in music. There's a lot of folks, I mean, just because we're in the YouTube podcast, you know, space, like, there's a lot of folks who spend most of their time yelling at a camera in their bedroom, in a gaming chair. And that's relatable now. There's a lot of folks spend a lot of time in their gaming chair in their bedroom, and that's no judgment on that. But to the extent that this is social music, you gotta rub up against the rest of society as a part of your development as a human being. And social media has allowed us to insulate in ways that I would argue are quite harmful. You know, the whole advent of keyboard courage. You know, you get on social media and you spit fire about whatever you think, and then in person, you know, you're a church mouse. And you know, for me, I'm very much the opposite. Like any opinion you saw me write about, just know I'm way worse in person. Like whatever I'm on, just know, like, I'm locked and loaded. When we meet, I'm still on that for sure. I use social media anytime I get the same question more than 2 or 3 times in a week. I'll write about it, because it's like if three unrelated people have this question, there might be more than that. So I'll just, you know, answer that question in a longer form so folks can take their time with it. And I'm the last, as I don't know if I'm a very late Gen X or older millennial. I'm 42, whatever that makes me. But I caught, as we say, I caught the tail end of a lot of stuff. And part of that was access to elders. You know, a lot of folks just a little younger than me don't have access to older people. And so there's a lot of stuff that it's not their fault. They just didn't know. They didn't get to experience. Um, and there's a bunch of generational sort of fissures that we haven't really repaired yet. And so creating access to our elders is work we still have to do again. And some of our elders didn't leave us with very much in terms of how to keep that continuum, how to maintain that continuity, of passing it down, each one teach one, that kind of thing. Uh, young musicians would do well just if you got to go to a nursing home, just make some gigs at a nursing home, just so you can be around some old people. Uh, Create opportunities for them to engage with you and you to engage with them. Like one of the things I remember hearing from elders, unrelated, but like money can't be the only reason we do stuff. So some stuff just got to happen. It can't pay you, it can't make you look famous, it can't be a feather in your cap. Some stuff just got to happen. So you just got to go and do that. If it means you got to drive an hour and sit in traffic and eat bad food, or whatever the thing is, like you got to go have that experience. I remember when I first moved to New York, some of the first gigs I did was playing at homeless shelters at 7 a.m. And that's an experience I will never forget and continue to benefit from. And it didn't pay money, but there are things that I am and things that I know that I wouldn't be or know but for those experiences. And I think the need to document and curate everything is what keeps a lot of us, just as human beings, from the experiences we might otherwise benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a great point in terms of, and maybe social media has something to do with this too. I think people feel maybe entitled to a certain standard of living or a certain maybe standard of work.
Yeah.
I say there's a lot of people in my generation and in Gen Z. I actually kind of laugh when I hear it sometimes, like, oh, I don't know what I want to do yet, but I want to be financially stable. And I'm like, that's cool. But like, in order to do that, you're going to have to kind of figure it out like sooner rather than later. And, I think that's a very interesting. Sometimes you just have to do something because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to sit down and play through your major scales, just because if you don't know those, good luck.
Everything else is harder.
Right. If you gotta sit down and figure out that really hard bar in that transcription.
Absolutely.
Because it might show up in a solo 2 years from now.
Yeah. Also, the muscle of just starting will get you further than if you don't have that muscle. I mean, I have so many students where I just have to say, start, and it's going to be wrong. Start anyway. Eventually, it will be less wrong. Start. Do it. If you can't hear what the notes are in that particular bar, write anything. You'll get closer the more times you stare at it. The more time you try, you'll get closer and closer and closer. You will be wrong when you start. Start. Do it anyway. Your first big gig, you're going to get on the gig and you're going to fold. Show up. Hopefully you fold in a way that's survivable. You'll learn what you need to know for the next time. You will not evaporate from your failures. We often in education, we talk about developing to the point of higher versus lower quality failures. And then at a certain point, you can't, the listening audience can't tell the difference. But you got to fail enough times and survive them enough times and develop those reflexes so your failures become of a higher quality. Social media just allows folks to kind of present a highlight reel as their kind of resting state, and that doesn't even benefit them.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's hard to see them as a full human being as
Correct.
well when you
Absolutely.
when that's all you have on there. You have your best
Yep.
5 minutes of
Yep.
playing on
Absolutely.
you know. So
Oh,
and
let me
also-
just say this real quick,
Yeah,
just quickly about social media. Some people are just very good at playing into a ring light and lens. That's a skill all by itself. Some folks are just good or very well practiced at that. Playing into a ring light with a lens in the middle. It's not good or bad. That's a skill all by itself. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no audience. There's none of the, adrenaline chemicals that go through your body when you play for people.
Correct.
I mean, it's one of those things in undergrad. That's kind of, to me, it's kind of a basic aspect of music performance that students are somehow allowed to overlook in a lot of places. Is the difference between performing for even two people, versus performing for your voice memos on your iPhone.
Correct.
It's like, it's one thing, wow, I ran through this entire piece or this entire program for my iPhone and it was great, and then I brought two of my friends into the room to listen and I folded here, and here, and here.
Right.
And, and it's like, it's not fun necessarily, but that's not really the point,
Correct.
My undergrad teacher, Joe Luloff, he was constantly telling, he's like, there's somebody down the hall in the practice room, go play for them. If there's somebody in the music building and you're in a rehearsal hall playing through your program, send a message to the group chat, bring them in, have them listen, because that's the only way. And then, and he'd have us play in studio class. Sometimes he'd even, he'd make sure, that we sat there for a while, let the reed dry out a little bit, let if you had warmed up, too bad.
Get cold again.
Yeah, he'd ice you for a bit. And
Yep.
he'd say, yep, no, it's time to get up there. Tell us about your piece. Go ahead. And that was so beneficial to my ability to stand in front of people and
deliver.
play, because it's, people who have different thresholds for that. I've seen young students, maybe middle school, high school, get up for the first time and play in front of people and shake to the point where they pretty much can't play.
That was me. That was me.
Yeah.
I would shake so badly that it actually changed my sound because my body was shaking so bad. But you just got to get up and do it until the moment of performance is not so unique to your other moments. It's not so different than your other moments. And then you can function more in alignment with how you actually are rather than your nerves. Yeah.
Yeah, you get habituated to
Yep.
those chemicals and your
Also,
tolerance.
to your point, your teacher about go play for your person down the hall in the practice room, that's the beginning of community building too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, maybe, I think in some ways social media has made some of those community building aspects easier in terms of like the point of entry is easier.
I agree. Yep.
Like, I can go follow any saxophonist I want to on Instagram. I can follow the North American Saxophone Alliance. I can follow Lincoln Center, Jack Rudin competition, whatever.
Yep.
Any organization, Jen, I can follow, Jazz Education Network. That's great because it's an easy point of entry. It's free. All I need is an account. But, for really young people, the mental aspects of seeing these curated, kind of perfect, air quotes, perfect accounts, I think it can be really detrimental if they aren't coached to kind of recognize those things, But yeah, the point of entry thing, I think for me, in some ways, social media sort of allowed me to realize that I could study music.
Absolutely.
Because I came from, my father is an amateur musician. My mom is not a musician. My dad, he's mainly a bass player.
Okay.
But, he plays banjo and guitar and sings, and he likes to play, old time music and blues music and rock and roll and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Plays electric and upright.
Sure.
And it's funny. Initially, I wanted to be a bass player, but I just found the saxophone more natural for me. I found treble clef more natural. Anyway, that's all kind of coincidental stuff. But I think I grew up, really valuing academics, and this is another issue. I think sometimes music in a lot of school systems is kind of cast aside as just like an activity and not an academic pursuit. And I think it's easy to separate the two mentally for a lot of students.
Sure. Well, I think what has happened being in education, both in extracurricular, collegiate education, high school, middle school, summer camps, all of that, there is school systems know what they're doing in taking music out of the schools. Like it's not an accident that music programs have been terminated. Music is a vocation. Way before it's an art form, it's a vocation. And schools have removed vocational training because vocational training undermines prison populations. If you graduate high school with a vocation, you are much less likely to find yourself caught up in the correctional system. And that's just that on that. A whole lot of folks, without even knowing it, have retirement portfolios that are dependent on what we'll call carceral investment. Okay. The vocation of music is one of what we call sworn vocations. It's one of the noble things to do in your life. I would argue that if music students, and I don't even mean like in college, I'm saying in elementary school, rhythm sticks, glockenspiel, that kind of stuff. If there was a way for people who presented even a nominal aptitude in those things to stay in the space long enough to where their proficiency and their passion could intersect, then you have a person who has a vocational support for the rest of their life. Okay? Everything is easier once you find where your passion and your proficiency intersect. Okay? And to quote, what's his name? Scott Galloway, like you have to demonstrate excellence in public. You have to comport yourself at a certain level to attract other people, be it for romantic, professional, social interaction, whatever. You got to go up in front of people and be good at something. Okay, music, has a lot more space than a lot of other things do for that opportunity to happen. But we got to keep the level high. We got to insist that kids pursue the thing. A lot of times, especially in places like New York City, everything is just about accolade Olympics. So you got kids who just participate because now you get a trophy for just being there. So you just participate in a million things without actually developing proficiency in anything. For me, that reminds me, I broadly kind of divide the educational experience into three kind of categories. There's sufficiency, which is like, do you have the tool, right? Proficiency is, can you use the tool? That's why we have proficiency exams, right? And then there's efficiency, which is the energetic cost of the tool, right? Because if you can only do it once, it's like not being able to do it. And so you just sort of you sort of go through that cycle, because after you get a level of proficiency, it's not about whether you can do it. It's like, can you do it more easily? And that means that's the efficiency part. You see, but man, if we could treat music like a vocation, I would argue a lot more places would support it as the job we need it, because music is a human resource. We need it whether we think it's important or not.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a really good point. And even vocations and trades right now,
Yeah,
there are some where we're just not. We don't have enough welders. We don't have
absolutely.
enough, and also some of the people, the people who keep our cities running. I mean, construction workers, city planners, road workers, etc. Plumbers.
Yeah,
I mean, the list goes on. We continuously refuse to invest in those people and then wonder why we have so many potholes.
yeah.
Why
Why it takes 3 years to put in a staircase?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And I think it's the same with music. People complain, oh, there's not as much good live music anymore. Why is there all this pre-recorded music? Where's the live music? And it's like, well, I mean, invest in music, invest in musicians, and you'd be surprised that people will want to play.
absolutely. Also, like, like as a parent, why are we doing the boring jobs, if not to create opportunities for our kids to do the less boring jobs? Like, and somebody's got to do all the jobs. So but we've kind of told everyone to be a lawyer, doctor, accountant, you know, civil engineer, and if you're not those things, then nothing else matters. And it's like, yeah, but on your way to your job, you got Audible in your ear, you got Cobuzz, or you're listening to your favorite musician, or you're reading poetry, or you're looking at ads on the train. Like, someone had to do all those things,
Oh yeah.
and those contribute to your experience as a human being.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. I think it's interesting to think about what we sort of paint as boring or interesting.
Correct.
It's like there are things that are maybe mundane or normal that, when you actually think about it, are quite interesting. I mean,
Absolutely.
even lawyers and doctors, me being from Michigan and experiencing the roads in Michigan, for instance,
Yeah.
even lawyers and doctors appreciate a freshly paved road. That's not boring. When you
Yeah.
cross the border from Michigan to Ohio and it feels like you're floating
Yeah.
because
Right.
they
Yeah.
invest in the roads, that's
See?
a good feeling. And
Yeah.
and if you really think about, a group of people worked really hard to put in that road.
Yeah. 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 Like, man, I remember the first time I got on a New York subway system or a subway a train where the cars were connected. So you could just walk up and down the train and just find a seat. And it felt like my birthday, right? Like, it felt like it was like I can just find a seat. That was the most beautiful experience. And I mean, things like that add to your quality of life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's something that it's interesting, the United States being so huge. We have some cities that are doing better jobs than others, but you go
Sure.
to smaller countries, like I have family in Stockholm, Sweden.
Oh yeah, well,
And
Scandinavia is a test case all by itself. Yeah,
right,
yeah,
and I mean, of course, it's very culturally and racially homogenous. It's
yeah.
easy to get everybody to agree, so it's not
Correct.
like it's kind of an apples to oranges
It
comparison in
is.
some
Yeah,
ways.
but I hear you. Yeah,
But the public transportation is great. The roads are great. Everything's clean.
yeah,
Everyone has health care,
yeah,
and it's you could just. It's like when you go to that country, it's almost like the air, not even pollution wise. The air is cleaner
Yes.
almost on a spiritual level.
No,
People are not stressed and yelling at each other.
That is true.
It's clean.
That is true. Have you ever seen, speaking of social media, there's this Instagram reel that asks you to judge, is this what did it say? Is this a London flat or a Scandinavian prison?
Yes, I have seen that, and that's pretty.
Telling.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, and I mean, often the Scandinavian prison is noticeably more accommodating than the London apartment.
Yeah, and I know at least in Sweden, a lot of their legal system is focused on, like remediation and reintegration
Absolutely.
rather than just incarceration and punishment.
Just punishment, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of what and I've taught in the correctional environment. A lot of what it is, a lot of the American correctional system is to generate profit and to exacerbate whatever punishment is delivered. It's to make everything feel punitive. The food feels like punishment. The clothes feel like punishment. The beds feel like punishment. The lights, the paint, the smells, everything feels like punishment. And so it's already punishment without those things. The fact that you can't leave is punishment. That you're disconnected from your community is punishment. But in the States, a lot of what is there is just to create that affect of punishment.
Yeah, and I think, another interesting thing, if you read up on people who are wrongfully incarcerated, it's amazing how those environments will lead people to punish themselves.
Absolutely.
Which I think very much lends itself to, aspects of everyday life, whether it's, work environments, academic
100%.
environments. But, people who are wrongfully incarcerated sometimes will convince themselves they somehow deserve
Absolutely
to be there.
Absolutely. In the States, the things that make the materials, the paints, the light bulbs, the smells, the food, while they're there to make prison feel like punishment, the exact same materials are used for public schools and hospitals, and in New York City, public housing as well. And so when I've had students, system-involved students who've since gone home, they go home and they say, man, it's the same paint. This is the same paint from when I was down. How we got the exact same cages on the windows from being inside, right? Like how are the meals at my kid's school the exact same meals we got in prison? You see? So, there's a lot. Like once we start to pull on those threads, there's a lot we got to change.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to investing in people
Absolutely.
rather than investing in, whatever it might be, in corporations.
Corporations, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So pivoting to again back to teaching.
Cool.
In academia.
Yep.
This is a question that I always ask in my interviews. How do you balance encouragement and criticism while helping a student reach their full potential as an artist?
Before I got to college, I had very encouraging teachers. And once I got to college, I had very critical teachers. And often the critique came from my having experienced some professional success. I won't say notoriety because I wasn't famous, but I'd already started to work kind of soon after I got to New York, and I was still in undergrad. But a lot of what I found to be criticism, if it is not delivered alongside solution to what's being critiqued, it's just shaming. And a little bit of shame is good if it is delivered alongside a solution. But most of what I got came from people who were trying to manage their own intellectual cowardice and professional insecurity via their teaching position. I am very particular about the results I'm trying to get from students, which is why, my students know if at any point I'm saying anything that doesn't make sense, if you don't know, say that, and I'm gonna stop what I'm doing and teach it to you. And this like, if you tell me you don't know how to tie your shoes, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna show you. If you say you don't know which way to read goes on the mouthpiece, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna show you. Okay? If you say you can't read the word Bundy, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna show you. Okay? If you don't know what a chord is, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna show you. Okay? Being critical of students, I mean, there's a way to remind students of whatever level they're trying to pursue. But as educators, we can't know when that's going to click for them. And so you present them with what they need, and you have to scaffold them from where they're at to where you want them to be. You can't just say, here are the books, go, because that works for such a small minority of students. It's like you're not teaching at all. You're just sharing a reading list to somebody. Yeah, that's cool. But for most people, they need a scaffold to get from where they're at to where they want to be. And that's got to be that's necessarily a stepwise process.
A solution. If you say, oh man, you're just really out of tune all the time, period. It's like, that is just not help. That is it. Are you sharp? Are you flat? Are there specific registers you're out of tune in?
Right.
Is there something that you could be doing, like practicing with drones, looking at a tuner?
Correct.
Like, in the absence of those suggestions, it is just harmful.
It is harmful, and it's cowardly. That's the thing, man. Like, it's not that hard to learn how to raise the level of a student. Like, we haven't just started teaching. Like, there's so many ways to reach a student. You just got to decide that that's why you're there. And so once you get clear on that, the student kind of shows you what they need. And over time, they'll show you how to get it to them. They might not even know that they're showing you, but they're showing you how to teach them. You just got to look. You just got to watch. You got to pay attention. See, what I found, particularly in places like New York, a lot of folks are not teaching to grow students. They're there to gain disciples. They just want to be the worshipful leader of their own religion. And, good luck with that.
Yeah, and this just sort of came back to me. My high school saxophone teacher, Shannon Ford, she was the first person to kind of, I think, change for me what it meant to study music and to practice and things like that. And part of the way that she did that was very simple, but deliberate setting of expectations. So she would say, for instance, she would ask me a theoretical question, like in an etude, these three notes, what triad is this? And I would kind of flounder, and it's I would see a C, and then I'm like, is it C? And she's like, don't guess. That's one of the very simple but extremely helpful instructions she would give me is, don't guess. You're allowed to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then we can figure it out.
Exactly.
And that's when she's like, look at this. You might have C, E, and A. That's an inversion of an A minor triad.
Correct.
And she see, and she would write it out, and she would say, here's first inversion, here's second. Now do you see how that fits in? And just providing an environment, creating an environment,
correct,
where it was okay to say, I don't know.
Exactly.
And then the expected immediate follow-up was that we would figure it out.
Correct. Correct.
That was how I learned.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you know what you know. And the thing is, once you know, you can relax about the fact that you know now. And so you don't have to prove that you know. You'll demonstrate that you know through your experiences. But often, what I used to get, I'm not going to tell you because you need to figure it out. And that's the that's the that's the positionality of an intellectual coward. Um, the you know you'll know cowardice because a coward injects needless mystery into the educational process, right? They want you to climb up a mountain and find a hooded person and snatch a pebble from their hand and then go use that pebble to plant a tree and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like it turns into, Kung Fu, the legend continues real quick. Okay. And that's just a way to make sure that not only don't your students learn anything, but your presentation is so mystified that whoever's paying you to deliver this nonsense can't understand that you don't know what you're doing. It just sounds fancy right now. So, okay, cool. Um, the educational process or the experience of growing learners really is one where once you kind of get out of your own ego and you just kind of you're trying different things, and when you find the thing that clicks for a student and they realize something has clicked for them, the clouds part for everybody. you know um, the the thing about being a teacher is that if you do not have something outside of your educational experience that sort of gratifies you and strokes your ego, then you're teaching to try and chase that feeling. And that I find is the beginning of a lot of the negative experiences we had. One example, and I'll keep him nameless for now, but I had a teacher, and I'm paraphrasing so that this can be heard by younger audiences too. But there was a teacher and now an occasional colleague of mine where I said, you don't have to be an objectively terrible person to your students. And he replied with, "It's not that simple." And I said, we're just not going to agree on this. Like there's no part of teaching music where it requires you to be that, particularly when you have an option. But if you don't have an option, you shouldn't be in that space.
Yeah, that's a great point, I think. And it's interesting not to talk about the movie Whiplash too much, because people have lots of opinions about, especially jazz musicians have lots of opinions about that movie. But I think the core ideas within it do exist in parts of, well, the music world, the athletic world, the academic world, really any discipline, where that you have a teacher who genuinely thinks that by being, like you said, objectively terrible towards people is somehow going to inform them faster. It's going to promote action and growth.
Yeah, no.
Joe Jones publicly shaming Charlie Parker is the reason why he was great. I think that is just a fallacy.
Agreed.
You're going, you're skipping so much by saying things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can at least leave as an option for all music educators, here's a person who I don't really like as a music teacher and I'm a student. Here is a coward who doesn't have another way to make money. So they're doing what they got to do to sort of live in their cowardice and earn a living. That's just what that is. So, hey, everybody's doing the best they can, but sometimes that's what that looks like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think some of this comes down to maybe shifting our societal ideas about what leadership and teaching look like. And I think one thing I'm very disappointed about in terms of the state of leadership right now, especially, is important people just don't ask questions anymore. They're not asking people, that could be students, that could be the general populace, what they think. And and whether or not they ask almost doesn't matter. It's like if there's no action to meet the needs of students, no action to meet the needs of the people, then I mean, whether or not you ask the question almost doesn't matter, you know.
Agreed.
And
yeah.
I think teachers all over the world, there are a good number of them that need to be more introspective and need to ask more questions of their students, rather than, like you said, handing them a reading list or just telling them what their teacher told them.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, if a lot of what your teaching is relaying messages, there's a way to do that, you know, that's edifying, you know, but it's got to be about the student. It can't be about you and what you think you know and your program, like that you have to deliver because that's the syllabus you turned in, right? Like you got to teach who's in front of you. And I've seen so many examples where teachers find it a personal affront that their students don't already worship them. You know, I saw a teacher ask a group of his students, "How many of my albums do you already own?" What? You know, I remember when I first got to New York, I didn't know better than to just ask the question I had. Okay, but when I first got to New York, I'm enrolled at the new school. I guess they call it the New School for Social Research. It's undergone different names, but that's what it was called at the time. And you know, this is the first time I'm around folks who were, as we say, members of my record collection, right? And so the first person I met an older gentleman. I said, "Hello, my name's Jason Marshall." He says, "My name's Reggie Workman." I said, "Okay, who did you play with?" That's the first question I asked him. He goes, "Well, a lot of folks, but Art Blakey and John Coltrane." I said, "Okay, I'm in the right place. Great, cool." I asked another one, "Who did you play with?" "My name's Jason Marshall." "Hello, Mr. Owens." This is Jimmy Owens. "Who did you play with?" "Well, I played with Dizzy, and I, played with Thad Jones Miller." "Oh, okay, I'm in the right place." I got to one of my classes. I said, "Hello, who are you and who did you play with?" And the teacher goes, "I'll decide what we discussed today." And in that moment, I said, I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Now, because of that, any teaching environment that I'm in, I play for my students first. Because if my demonstration does not cause you to trust what I'm going to say, we should not be in the same room. If I can't produce a result that you aspire to, I should not be your teacher. I just shouldn't be your teacher. And that exists at all levels, right? Like, you don't have to be Cannonball Adderley to teach music, but if you're teaching beginner students and you can't play their music if you can't play beginning music at a high level, you shouldn't be teaching beginner students. If you're teaching college students and you're not better than they are, you shouldn't be their teacher. It's a big world. Go do something else. Like, particularly in this space, as from a vocational standpoint, you should be objectively better than your students. And yeah, every so often we find a prodigy that's just great at 14 years old, and okay, fine. But for the most part, you know, you got to be objectively better. You got to deliver an example that causes your students to trust your information.
And also, to that point, I think going back to our discussion of asking questions and being a true leader, you know, having the humility and the what shall we say, humbleness to refer that student to somebody else.
Correct.
To say, hey, I mean, wow, you know, you have already kind of surpassed the level of what I'm normally dealing with, and here are some people I think you really should consider studying with.
Absolutely.
Give them the names, give them the schools. You know, I think, you know, don't just hang on to that student because you think it's going to do something for you.
Correct. Correct. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. I definitely benefited from all versions of that, which is to say, you know, my middle school band director taught me how to read music, and you know, I think her primary instrument was flute, and was Holly Pasquale. Is Holly Pasquale. I just remember being in band class, and she goes, "Wait a minute, you don't know how to read music." And I felt so kind of unveiled at that point. You're right, because I was just kind of getting by on my ears. But she was like, "You don't know how to read music." And I couldn't even really respond. And before I could form any other words, she goes, "I have to teach you how to read music. You can't leave my class and not know how to read music." But before I got out of middle school, I could read music. Mission accomplished. You know,
so before we wrap up here, I wanted to ask.
Come on.
Obviously, busy schedule, living in New York and teaching at multiple places, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, when you have the time, you know, what do you like to do outside of music?
I like to work out. You know, I like to lift weights. I like to ride my bicycle. I like to run. I do yoga every day. I'm happy to announce my yoga streak is at 900 days in a row.
Wow.
And I'm not a super duper flexible person, but it's the practice of practice. You know, it's the submission to a regimen that has carried me through a lot of hardship. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's really a pleasure to have you.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This concludes episode 26 of The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, featuring special guest Jason Moore.